Okay, so this week we are talking about both overviews of reference services and finding stuff. And so that is what these slides are about. So, first question, how should we define reference services? It's their original functions were to teach people how to use the library and its resources, answer people's questions, help readers selecting good books, and also promoting the library within the community. And certainly, these are things that we are still doing in libraries. And of course, with technology, a lot of this has become more complex and expanded. So, one thing to think about, how has reference changed in your lifetime? Um, with these pictures are really an indication of how reference has changed in my lifetime to some extent. The woman on the left is wearing horn rimmed glasses, and I certainly know that the first pair of glasses that I got looked very similar. And of course, the woman on the right is much more modern with her computer. So this week we read about shifts in reference services, and I thought it might be fun to think about how libraries have changed since you started using them, and to think about this from a reference perspective as well. So I have set up a discussion area for this very thing. So there are three commonly thought of styles for reference. The first is called conservative or minimum, and the primary role in this scenario is to teach patrons how to use the library and help them find sources, but not read or interpret them. And this is often associated with academic libraries. The next scenario is moderate or middling. And here you teach the user how to use sources, but also provide answers to many questions. So if you were in a public library, you wouldn't do anyone's homework assignments, but you might search fairly extensively to find answers for research and factual questions. And then the last is the liberal or maximum. And in this instance, you would take someone's question and conduct the research yourself, find appropriate material, and present it to the user. And in some cases, you would even write a summary or an analysis. And this is more common in special libraries, hospitals, law libraries, corporate libraries. I have been told that at the OU Health Sciences Center, that's pretty much what the librarians do, is that they literally find the resources for whoever is asking, and that is their main function. So, what about reference models? Some of the readings this week talked about whether or not there should even be a reference desk and who should staff it. I also opened up a discussion area for us to talk about this, so please let us know your thoughts. And there are all these different kinds of reference models. It can be dizzying. So, first, there's a dedicated reference desk, which I think is pretty self explanatory. There are now often shared desks with circulation and paraprofessionals. Or there can be roving reference where librarians move around the library to talk with patrons as they come upon them looking for information. I missed embedded librarians, but those are usually in academic libraries where they're assigned to a class or they're part of a class for a whole semester or even for a department, and their primary job is to work with those particular people on an ongoing basis. There's something called tiered service, and this consists of various levels where people at the desk answer simple questions, and as questions get more complicated, professional librarians are brought in. In some places, the first line of reference might be students working in the library, and things then progress from there. And along with this are consulting and appointments, which have also become more common with things like shared desks and tiered service. And of course, that would be making an appointment with a reference librarian to have dedicated time. And then there are a number of different digital interactions that can occur. I believe you're probably familiar with all of them: social media, email, chat, online forums. You might be less familiar with consortia, and they often comprise um, environments or situations where libraries in multiple places work together to provide reference services as a whole. So that means it's possible that a librarian at a different location might be helping you when it's over the phone or through digital media. And another discussion point: what would you do if you were a director of a library? How would you set up reference in various types of libraries? What seems most appealing to you? So, I want to talk about bibliographic control for a moment. This isn't covered in the week's readings and is only briefly mentioned in the text, but because this week you are being introduced to basic search strategies, it's also important to understand somewhat what bibliographic control is about. If you haven't already taken LIS 5043, Organization of Information, this will be covered in much more detail. So basically, bibliographic control includes all the activities involved in creating, organizing, managing, and maintaining records of collections so that we can access them. This also includes standardization of bibliographic description and subject classification, the creation and maintenance of catalogs and finding aids, and the provision of physical access to the items in the collection. So what does this mean in a nutshell? Bibliographic control is about the ways we organize information so that people can access it, how we arrange things. This can be done alphabetically, like in many dictionaries and encyclopedias, or it can be done by classification, which is what books look like when you browse the library shelves or the online catalog, in that similar items are placed together. It also means that we need to have standards of how things are organized. We can't just call each thing something else willy-nilly. There have to be ways that guide us, particularly catalogers and database designers, in how to organize things. So would you organize your books by color? You might, but it probably isn't all that practical for browsing purposes. You could also have a database that lists everything and refers patrons to where to find them to help with that, but it would be hard for patrons if they had to look up every single thing. I do have a friend, an anthropology professor, who actually does organize her books by color. And when I saw that, I was pretty amazed, and she thought that was a very reasonable way to organize her books. It works for her. So, what about co-location? Basically, that's what we've been talking about: arranging things so that they're located with similar materials, whether that's books on a shelf or items in the database, whether in an old-fashioned catalog or in a database. There's something called syndetic structure, which refers to the links between old headings and new headings, such as See or See Also. It's about how we name things, how we, for example, link authors' names You might want to group Mark Twain as a main name, but have pointers from Samuel Clemens so that someone can access all the materials should they want to. Collocation is also related to authority control in that standards for naming things change, and so it's important to be able to find everything related to a particular name or subject. And a lot of this is about how things are cataloged, but it's important for reference librarians to understand how this works so that they can find information. And these standards are generally set by the Library of Congress, although sometimes libraries also have local standards. And new standards usually come out every month. You also all have heard of the Dewey Decimal System, which is used in public libraries. The National Library of Medicine also has its own standards for naming things, and these would be used for medical libraries. And government documents has their own standards. And I'm not going to go any more heavily into classification because that's really for an information organization class, but I did want you to have a sense about how things are located and where these rules come from. And then last, all of these classification schemes are what's called control vocabulary, and as I said, it's how libraries organize their materials. And not only are these systems of controls, but databases have control vocabularies, and understanding this is part of how you can do your searching when you're in a database. So, what is an index in relation to a database? Basically, indexes point to information, giving us access to it. Something to understand is that databases have their own control vocabulary based on the subject matter they are indexing. Databases develop thesauri or indexes of the words that you can use for a search. And these words or descriptions can be broadened and narrowed to get better results. And these are going to differ depending on the database. And we'll talk more about that when we really get into looking at databases. And then last, I want to talk about recall, relevance, and precision. But I want to preface this by saying that when they were presented to me in my master's program, they kind of went over my head. And it really wasn't until my PhD program that they started making sense. These terms are not really mentioned in the text, but I feel as though I would be remiss if I didn't at least point them out to you as they are basic ideas in our field. So first, relevance. Relevance is whether a document is, okay, so let me start that again. Whether a document is relevant depends upon the individual researcher, on the situation presented, and on the researcher's own knowledge and understanding of the subject. So basically, you're asking, does a retrieved document add to your understanding of the issues you are researching? Recall is referring to the percentage of the total relevant documents in a database retrieved by your search. So if you knew for a fact that there were 1,000 relevant documents in a database and your search retrieved 100 of these, your recall would be 10%. But the reality is that except in a controlled experimental database, it's impossible to know the total number of relevant documents in a collection because you don't know what has not been found. And then last, precision is the percentage of records in a retrieved set that's relevant to the search topic. So let's say you searched for something and you got, I don't know, 100 documents back, but then really only about 80 of them were relevant. And so that would be how precise that search was. And so, based on what you turn up, you might want to change your search. If there aren't enough relevant documents, then your search needs more precision. And then regarding searching, I've uploaded some exercises and documents that address it. And the Wong article for this week also encompasses a lot of that. And I have also opened up a discussion area where you can talk about any of this that you want more clarity about. And we have reached the very end.